Have you ever noticed how much time we spend staring at those charts and graphs, trying to figure out this whole money thing? But what if I told you the real story isn't hidden in some spreadsheet? What if it's something way more personal?
I think a lot of people would be surprised to hear that.
Right. Today, we're going deep on how your own experiences, literally every single one, shape the way you make decisions with your money.
That's a pretty big statement.
It is. And we've got this book, The Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel. We're going to be pulling out some of the juiciest bits to help us on this little mission of ours.
A mission, you say? Sounds intense.
It is. We're uncovering the why behind some of those money moves that might seem completely bonkers to everyone else, but when you look closer through the lens of someone's life, it actually makes perfect sense.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
Think about it. How you were raised, the ups and downs of the economy you've lived through, even just those gut feelings you get about money. It all comes together to create your own unique money blueprint.
Yeah, that's the core of it.
Yeah.
We often treat finance like it's this completely objective thing, pure science.
Like 2 + 2 = 4, always.
Exactly. But underneath all those numbers, it's way more subjective than people realize.
So much gray area.
So much. And the really cool part is how your personal journey, all those experiences, create your own financial reality. They shape how you see risk or opportunity, even what it means to be rich.
And probably not in ways we even realize, right?
Often totally under the radar.
So let's jump right in. Housel has this idea that no one's crazy. And when I first read it, it really hit me hard.
What is it about that phrase that got you thinking?
It's the idea that even when someone makes a financial decision that seems completely nuts to us, like totally off the wall, it actually makes perfect sense to them in that moment based on their own life story.
So it's all about perspective.
Totally. And he gives this example of a tech executive, super smart guy, made a fortune in the tech world, sold multiple companies. I mean, serious success, right?
Sounds like he had it all figured out.
You'd think so. But then he's in a hotel, breaks a lamp worth like $500, and instead of just paying for it, he throws down $5,000.
Oh, hold on. $5,000 for a broken lamp.
Yep. And tells the manager to never disrespect him again.
Okay, that's a little much.
It is. And you know what? This guy later went completely bankrupt.
Oh, wow. So there's clearly more to this story than meets the eye.
Right. On paper, it's like, what was he thinking? But it gets to the heart of what Housel is saying. Being good with money isn't about how smart you are. It's about how you behave.
So even with all that intelligence, his behavior around money wasn't in check.
Exactly. And the key takeaway here is that high IQ doesn't automatically equal smart financial choices. It's about emotional discipline and understanding your own biases, those things that trip you up.
It's like having the brains but not the brakes.
Perfect analogy. Okay, now get this. Housel contrasts that story with the life of Ronald Reed. This guy had no fancy education, worked as a janitor and at a gas station.
Doesn't sound like the typical millionaire story.
Not at all. But get this. When he passed away, he had quietly accumulated over $8 million.
$8 million? You're kidding.
Nope. No secret stock tips, no lottery wins, no inheritance. Just consistent saving and investing in solid, reliable companies. The blue chip stocks for decades.
That's incredible. It really highlights the power of consistency over time.
Right. It's like slow and steady wins the race. While the tech executive had all the brains and ended up with nothing, Ronald Reed just kept plugging away, making smart choices day after day.
It's a powerful reminder that consistent positive behavior is more important than flashy intelligence or income.
Totally. And it forces you to think about how much our backgrounds shape our view of money. Someone who grew up struggling financially, they're going to react to risk way differently than someone raised in comfort, right?
Absolutely. Their whole understanding of safety and security is different.
Totally. Same with someone who lived through crazy inflation. They'll see stable prices completely differently than someone who's only ever known them.
Makes sense. Their experience of what normal is totally different.
Right. It's like imagine someone who lost it all in the Great Depression.
Versus someone who made a killing in the tech boom of the late 90s.
Exactly. It's like night and day, those two. And even something like the fact that Australia hasn't had a recession in decades, that's a financial reality that most of the world can't even fathom.
Because their whole experience is based on the expectation of boom and bust cycles.
Exactly. And here's where it gets really interesting. Housel says our personal history with money might be a tiny fraction of all financial history ever.
Like a drop in the bucket.
Even smaller. He says think like 0.00000000001%. But get this. that tiny sliver can account for maybe 80% of how we believe the financial world works.
So our personal experiences outweigh all the data and
It's
history.
crazy, right?
Yeah.
It explains why you can have two brilliant people with totally opposite views on everything from recessions to investing to risk.
Because they're looking at the same world through completely different lenses.
Yeah.
Lenses shaped by their past.
Exactly. And you can read all the history books you want about a financial crisis, but you can't truly get that gut-wrenching fear if you didn't live through it.
It's like trying to explain the color blue to someone who's never seen it.
Perfect analogy. Someone who went through that hardship might look at our generation playing around with stocks and think we're totally clueless.
Because to them, it's not a game, it's survival.
Right. And the research backs this up. House says our experiences in young adulthood are like anchors for our money decisions throughout our lives.
Anchors. What do you mean?
Like they hold us in place. For example, if you grew up with crazy inflation, you're probably going to be hesitant about bonds later on because you saw how quickly they could lose value.
Interesting. Makes sense, though.
Right. And on the flip side, if you saw the stock market booming early on, you're probably going to be more into stocks as an adult.
Because that's your reference point for what's possible.
Exactly. And there are so many examples. Household talks about Bill Gross, the bond guy.
Oh, yeah, the bond king.
Right. His whole career, interest rates were going down, which made bonds super profitable. So naturally, he saw them as these amazing wealth-building things.
Makes sense. That was his reality.
But imagine his dad's generation. They probably lived through high inflation and saw those same bonds as like wealth destroyers.
Same tool,
Yeah.
but totally different meanings attached to it.
Isn't that wild? Or think about someone born in 1970. They saw the S&P 500 take off during their teens and 20s.
Stocks were going up and up.
Right. But now imagine someone born in 1950. That same index went basically nowhere for them during those same crucial years.
So their whole experience of the stock market is completely different.
And that's just the starting point for how they view investing.
Wow. I never thought about it like that.
Or think about inflation. If you were young in the 60s and 70s in America, prices more than tripled. Gas shortages, your paycheck not going as far, that sticks with you.
A real-life lesson in economics.
But someone born in the 90s, they might not even think about inflation. They've only ever known stable prices.
It's all relative to what you've lived through.
Totally. And Housel points out with the 2009 unemployment rates that even within a single event like the financial crisis, the impact can be totally different depending on who you are.
Like depending on your race, age, education, gender, all of it.
Exactly. Which brings us to this really crucial point. Every financial decision, even the ones that seem totally off to us, they all make sense in the mind of the person making it at that moment.
So it's not about judging, it's about understanding.
Exactly. They're taking what they know and fitting it into their own mental model of how money works. They might be wrong or biased, but it makes sense to them.
I like that. It encourages empathy rather than judgment.
Totally. Think about lottery tickets. It might seem crazy that people who can barely make ends meet spend so much on them.
Especially when they might not be able to handle a small emergency.
Right. But if you step into their shoes, it kind of makes sense. If you're living paycheck to paycheck, a lottery ticket might be the only glimmer of hope, the only way to dream of a better life.
I see your point. It's like they're buying into that possibility.
Exactly. And we might not agree with it financially, but understanding why they do it is so important.
Absolutely. It reminds us that financial decisions aren't always about logic. They're often driven by emotions and deeply personal beliefs.
So true. And speaking of things that are often overlooked, that brings us to our next big idea, luck and risk. These two forces are like best friends, always hanging out. And it's so important to remember that financial outcomes are hugely affected by stuff we can't control.
So it's not all about hard work and smarts.
Not always. There's this great quote by Scott Galloway. He says, "Nothing is as good or as bad as it seems." It's like a reality check when we're judging financial success, our own and other people's.
It's a good reminder to stay humble.
Totally. Think about Bill Gates. He went to one of the only high schools in the world that even had a computer. Pure luck, right? Thanks to a teacher who saw the future.
A lucky break that shaped his whole life.
Right. But then consider his friend Ken Evans, just as talented, just as driven. He died in a mountaineering accident when they were young.
Oh, wow. Talk about a twist of fate.
Right. 1 in a million risk, terrible outcome. Same amount of chance, completely different results.
It's a stark reminder that life can be unpredictable.
And what's fascinating is how hard it is for us to accept how much luck and risk play a role.
We like to believe we're in control.
Totally. When we see someone succeed, we tend to focus on their hard work and ignore the lucky breaks they got.
So it's not just about what they did, it's also about the opportunities that came their way.
Exactly. Like for every Bill Gates, there might be tons of equally talented people who just didn't get those same chances.
It makes you wonder how much of success is attributable to pure chance.
Right. And there's this question from Robert Shiller, a Nobel Prize winner in economics. He asks, what are the things about investing that we just can't know?
Because even with all the data and analysis, there's still an element of uncertainty.
And it's so hard to separate skill from luck.
So how do we even begin to assess financial success accurately?
That's the million-dollar question. And we see this bias when we look at failure, too. We immediately jump to lack of effort or bad decisions.
Instead of acknowledging that taking risks is part of the process.
Totally. It's like that story of Cornelius Vanderbilt, the railroad tycoon. People told him he was breaking the law with his business deal.
And his response was,
He basically said, you can't run a railroad by following all the rules. He was operating in a world where pushing boundaries was the norm.
so was he a visionary or a rule breaker? It depends on your perspective.
And it's easy to see how that same story could have ended badly.
The line between bold and reckless is so blurry sometimes.
And it often depends on the outcome, whether we see it as genius or stupidity.
It's like hindsight is 20/20.
Totally. And even Benjamin Graham, the father of value investing, his huge returns came from one big bet on Geico.
Which went against his own advice about diversification.
Right. Was it genius or pure luck? Who knows?
It's a great example of how even the most successful investors can benefit from a bit of good fortune.
And this is important for how we learn from our own mistakes. If we blame ourselves for every failure, we miss the role that risk played.
So it's not always about what we did wrong. It's about understanding the inherent risks involved.
Exactly. The key takeaway is to set up your financial life to survive those inevitable bumps in the road.
So you can keep playing the game and maybe get lucky along the way.
Exactly. And as Housel says, things are rarely as good or as bad as they seem.
It's a good reminder to keep things in perspective.
And that leads us perfectly to our final big idea, never enough. It's this feeling that no matter how much you have, it's never quite enough.
It's like a constant hunger for more.
And this section really hit me hard. There's this story about Kurt Vonnegut at a party hosted by a billionaire.
A billionaire. Sounds fancy.
Right. And Vonnegut is talking to Joseph Heller, the guy who wrote Catch-22, and he's like, this guy probably made more money today than you've made from your whole book.
Ouch. That's got to sting a little.
Right. But Heller's response is so good. He says, yeah, but I have something he'll never have. Enough.
Whoa. Mic drop moment right there.
Totally. And it's so profound, especially when you compare it to people who had insane success and wealth, but still risked it all for more.
Because they didn't have that sense of enough.
Exactly. Like Rajat Gupta. He went from nothing to becoming the CEO of McKinsey, one of the top consulting firms in the world, worth like $100 million by his mid-40s.
That's a level of success most people can only dream of.
Right. He could have done anything. But he wanted to be in the billionaire club and ended up doing insider trading and going to prison.
It's a classic tale of greed and ambition gone wrong.
It really makes you think, why would someone with so much risk it all?
It's like they get addicted to the chase.
And then there's Bernie Madoff. Before his Ponzi scheme, he had a legit business that made him super rich, but he still chose to do this massive fraud.
It's like they can't stop themselves. They always need more.
It's like the goalpost keeps moving. Housel talks about long-term capital management. These were brilliant traders with tons of their own money invested.
They weren't just playing with other people's money.
Nope. And they still took huge risks and lost everything in the 1998 crisis.
Wow. I feel like they got blinded by their own success.
And Warren Buffett said about them, to make money they didn't have and didn't need, they risked what they did have and did need, and that's foolish.
It's a powerful reminder that sometimes the best move is to simply protect what you already have.
And Housel says the hardest financial skill is getting that goalpost to stop moving. Because if your expectations grow faster than your money, you're always going to feel behind.
It's like running on a treadmill.
Yeah.
You're working hard, but not really getting anywhere.
And he says modern capitalism is great at creating wealth and envy.
So we're constantly comparing ourselves to others and wanting more.
And happiness is often just the difference between what you have and what you expect to have.
So managing expectations is key.
Totally. And the danger is that constant comparison game. Like Gupta and Madoff, they show us that some things are just not worth risking. Your reputation, freedom, relationships, happiness.
Because no amount of money can buy those back.
Exactly. So when we think about enough, it's not about finding a magic number.
It's about an internal shift in mindset.
Totally. It's not about taking bigger risks. It's about being content with what you have.
It's about appreciating the journey, not just the destination.
And that's a powerful place to end our deep dive today. You've learned how your own story shapes your money, views the crazy role of luck and risk, and why knowing when you have enough is so crucial.
It's about understanding the psychology behind your financial decisions.
And we hope you can now approach your money with a little more self-awareness and make choices that truly align with your values.
It's about moving beyond those spreadsheets and connecting with your own personal financial journey.
So here's one final thought for you to ponder. Take some time to really think about how your early experiences, those big life moments, are still shaping how you think about money today.
It's about uncovering those subconscious beliefs that might be driving your behavior.
Are you chasing a goalpost that keeps moving further away? And if so, what truly defines enough for you? That's a question worth exploring.
A question that could change your entire relationship with money.
Thanks for joining us.
It's been a pleasure diving deep with you.